Think we're ready? Okay, I call to order the Rolesville Board of Commissioners Workshop Session, July 18th, 2023. We've got a couple things on the agenda tonight we want to talk about. One is the Town Campus Center Site Plan presentation. ADW Consultants will be presenting that, and then the Capital Improvement Financial Plan from Davenport. And pretty light work session night. So anything from the board before we get started?
I'm good.
Anything from you? As you probably noticed, we got two commissioners, Sutton and Medley is not here tonight. You know, it is summertime and they were out of town, but we're not taking any actions other than sharing information that will be made public. So we will continue with that, and we will. Kelly, any introduction you want to do? Anything? Or?
Keith and Mitch are here, so whenever you're ready to start, Keith has got his presentation ready to go.
All right. Well, let's go. Come on up. Introduce yourself and kind of what you got going on there.
Sure. All right. Well, again, I'm Keith Carline with ADW Architects, and we've been working with you guys on the master planning and visioning of what could be out here. And since our last presentation, we've had some refinement in design options. We had 2 community meetings. I'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. We did finally get up with DOT, ran the ideas by them, so we got real positive feedback from them, and for an initial review, so that's good. So yeah, with that, we'll just get into it. We have some pretty exciting things to show you as well. Just a little bit about the open house, kind of who attended. We tried to find ways to graphically share information about the meeting with you guys, so kind of an idea of the people that came. We had a total of, I think, 13 people participate. Or
maybe both. We had about 50 throughout the day.
Yep. So we had good conversations here. We had easels up here with 4 options you all had seen before. We may have done a little tweaking to improve them a little before that. I can't remember, but we had the morning session and the afternoon, kind of early evening session, and it was good. We had a lot of good interaction, some feedback from people in the area, were a lot of the attendees, as you can kind of see here. So that was really a positive experience there. Let's see, it's just kind of zoomed in there. So we did have 4 concepts that they looked at, and there were a few caveats that we were throwing out. At that point, we hadn't been able to get a meeting scheduled with DOT, so that everything still sort of had an asterisk next to it. We really needed to get their feedback and make sure some of our driveway locations we were showing were good. And so option 3 was most everybody's favorite. There were a couple reasons why some of the others got some votes too. And one of those is we were saying we weren't 100% sure if DOT would like that scenario. That was the one that had the traffic circle and kind of the grand entrance, the buildings flanking it. So knowing that was still up in the air a bit until we got some feedback from DOT that made some people vote for some of the other ones. We got some good feedback from some of the folks involved with the fire department, just about trucks using the roundabouts and just sort of the access service. We've kind of fixed those issues, and I'll show you, sort of revised, updated things, but we've made it to where there would be easy truck traffic flow, so to speak, and we've made them better. So even with that, it was by far the standout that people liked, was option 3. Option 1 just flowed easy, but it did have impacts on the wetlands, so a lot of folks saw that as well. It's a factual, it would work easily enough, DOT should like it. But then there were people that didn't like that it was, causing mitigation of wetlands and things like that. And just the experience was different, more of a kind of business park feel or something maybe. But anyways, three definitely was the most. We tried to graphically show, we had everybody give them both your first and second place votes. So we thought just stacking them on top of each other made some sense. So that's kind of the summary there. One other meeting we did have, we sent the options to Wake County again and their team on the library, both their architect as well as the county's architects and design and project managers. And while they had comments on all of them, they were really fond of option 3 also. That's their by far number 1. The way we have this written, it doesn't really show their passion for that, but they're definitely were very drawn to option 3 is how they kind of started out. And then, you know, again, they weren't sure how the DOT thing might go on that and some other things. So they had nice feedback on all of it. It was very thoughtful, very, very helpful. So just kind of recap a couple of the options, and then I'll show you, we've done a little extra work on option 3, since that seems to be where there's a lot of mass gravitating. Concept 1, again, this was the one that kind of goes through the wetlands at that curve. And then it basically just laid it out, you know, very clean and simple. You know, parking was compartmentalized for each area. But this was really, I think most people's, the people that voted for this, I think were thinking in terms of what this would be a no-brainer for DOT. We all kind of knew that in this option. So I think it did receive some extra votes that way. And then we had the traffic circles in some of the other options, and the folks related to the fire department were really pointing out that it wasn't ideal, even if they were really big, which we had kind of that way.
Crossing that's in there, is that a blue line stream that's protected, usually protected, or is that just?
Yeah, these wetlands are protected, and any kind of impact you have on them, you would have to mitigate, and a lot of that, there's fees associated with that. There's limitations on what you can do with that. This, you know, it's mostly off them, but it does have an impact. We tried to, down in the bottom right corner, kind of indicated how much we were impacting them, because some of our original options impacted them more. I think we had kind of narrowed it down to ones that didn't as much. And it didn't make it as much of an amenity. Like, it was sort of something we're crossing with a road, and it didn't make it into as much of a nicety. The other options really focused on that, so.
If it's a blue line, then if you do the back one, it's got 2 crossings, and I know they don't like 2 crossings close together.
Yeah, and that's definitely an issue with the potential of that future road. I mean, it could be that it would have to have a bridge over it or something really expensive there. So I think for now, while we're still showing it, I know it's in the master transportation plan. Is that where it was? We're still showing it, but you know, it could be a little problematic just in its cost. So we're just kind of showing it as a future you know, potential there. So that was concept 1. Concept 2 was already out. I think we'd already narrowed that down. So concept 3 was really the one that everybody was mostly drawn to. You know, the nice things about this, I already mentioned, is, you know, as you enter off of East Young Street, you've got this very ceremonial view of Town Hall. You're flanked by, you know, prominent civic buildings on the sides there. But then it also really celebrates, you know, the potential of the wetland area. Although it's shown as like water, it's not exactly that, right? It's more cattails and irises and things like that probably. But we're showing like little pedestrian bridges over it and trail walkways, things like that. You know, it could be made into a special place in our mind. And the views out from Town Hall and the library and community center could be really nice looking into that. And we'd already talked about the fire station and how it functionally and safety-wise really needs to egress straight out onto Young Street in the future. And then, you know, it's also its location at the bottom there seemed to be, you know, the natural place for that. What we've done is we did eliminate the traffic circle. So it's still, our goal was to still have that feel so that you sort of have that same kind of monumental experience as you're coming into the campus, but improve the traffic flow and turning capabilities and stacking space, things like that. So any returning fire trucks, things like that, everything should flow very easily on this in this version, but it still kind of has that same feel functionally or visually, really. So that was the biggest difference with this.
And where's the veteran on that one?
Yeah.
Is that the community center?
Yeah, yes, sir.
And what's up there at the top, above the town hall to the back side?
That's the library.
No, I'm talking about, it's almost like a,
A flower garden.
This area,
yeah.
oh, that, we're just showing landscaping. Yeah. That'll be developed, of course, further as the plans go, but, you know, there can be nice landscaping where we're allowed, you know, where you're allowed to put it in, and then even in the wetlands, there may be some opportunities to plant irises or things, I don't know, we'll work on that, how to make that a more beautiful space. And then we had the Veterans Memorial here, so it was kind of a node and a hub, you know, that could be seen from many of the buildings, and also have a, while you're close enough to parking, if you have events a couple times a year there, it also is a serene setting, you know, and could be really peaceful and moving and all. So that had a lot of really nice things going on with this option.
I know a couple comments from the community has seen this, has talked about a reflection pond. Is that even possible?
Certainly could be, yeah. Yeah, not probably in the wetlands, but maybe in the
So you would-
memorial.
It could
or-
be, it could be where that area we're talking about right there. It could be?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yep. And the memorial, you'll see after this, we developed this one a little further, just seeing the synergy that was kind of coming around this option, and we felt good about, DOT was good with this location, so that was important. Also trying to figure out the traffic flows better. We think we really got that worked out, but much better. We've actually gone and done some 3D imagery and even a little animation of this one. So we'll show you a couple other options too, but it really was pulling us back to this one over and over. So I've got a couple still images and a little animation of this. I'll go ahead and show you while we're on it. Let me see, I think, yeah. So this, try not to look at the architecture on the buildings. We didn't want to just show white boxes. So we just threw some stuff together, but the designs wouldn't look like this. But it's focused on the site and the flow and kind of the areas that you see around the buildings. You know, that sort of first impression as you're coming into that campus. You know, you'd have, you know, nice civic buildings with the police on your right and fire on the left. Again, they won't look like this. And then town hall, you know, kind of at the end of the avenue there. Again, it won't look like that either, but it's a placeholder for now. But it gives you an idea of the experience and the path with the walkways moving, and, you know, just kind of the landscape possibilities. You know, nice view of the flags. We could do some stamped concrete, or maybe they're pavers. We'll see, you know, what would make sense. You know, starting to look at the wetland areas and these little bridges. It could be, you know, maybe it's not quite that lushly landscaped, but it, you know, may be able to be something along those lines. And there may be more landscaping around it, more park-like, you know, on the shores and things like that. You know, the memorial could be anything. It could be anything. What we just threw in there is we had all of the services and all of the first responder groups sort of in pillars, you know, so that maybe they're identified in some way. But, you know, that was just our quick thought at it. But there could be reflection stuff there. It
You
could
had an
be.
idea on this. Is that something similar, or have to design a little bit differently, Dan?
Actually, yes, because with the rear wall is where I would think about having all of the emblems of each of the services to include Space Force as well.
Yeah. So we have Coast Guard, Navy, Marines, Army, Air Force,
Force.
Space Force, and then we have EMS, fire, police, all in there. I think that's just the number, you know. But again, it might be that you might want an artist to be involved in that, or who knows, this could go in any way, or maybe you'd want, you know, like us to help design it, or, you know, it could go in any direction. It's just a placeholder again, you know, but to kind of give the idea of how it's kind of kind of in the middle of everything and seen by everything, but it's also sort of in a serene spot a little bit too, which was nice. We thought kind of showed the potentials there. Again, the rec center or community center wouldn't look like this, but it's just sort of the ideas. And here you can kind of see, how these different buildings front this kind of natural area on the backside, or I say front, kind of backside of them. Look out to them, so it could be some really pretty views and stuff like that from all the different buildings that are around it. So we see that as an amenity, not a problem, and it could really be anything we wanted it to be. It's like working with, nature instead of against it. It was sort of the concept there. So, so before we go to concept 4, let me see if I can bring up. We just did a quick animation. Again, buildings are just these white models as placeholders, but this kind of gives you an idea of the feel. I mean, I think, when you get past this master plan phase and the design of the buildings will have a big impact on this sense of place as well. So it'll be fun to figure out what the right language is for this campus and all, but. So we can watch that again later, but if you want, but it's, and we can share that with you guys too with a quick link. But we wanted to just kind of explore that one in more depth and help convey what we were feeling as we were, looking at it just in a 2D drawing. The potential's wide open, really. It could be a really cool space.
So your discussion with the fire department, maybe describe that a little bit. If I take this correctly, on exit, they'll be coming straight out to the street.
Yep.
But when they return, they'll be winding through
they would use, they wouldn't be going too far through the campus. It would be limited. It would just be sort of that quick return back. So that would be for any of the bays that they were going to keep as pull through, which is the ideal thing for your most frequent responding vehicles, maybe the primary engine, primary ladder, or something like that. On some of the other bays, we typically have the bays deep enough you could stack a couple engine-sized vehicles. They may back those in both ways, but they may not be pulling them out all the time. So it's ideal to have enough bays that you could kind of have your busiest stuff pull through. It's definitely safer to do that and all that. So, and again, all the sizes of these buildings are based off of the earlier space needs work you guys have had done in the past. So as the project moved forward, I think you'd want to go through a process of confirming all of that. It might be that some of those things could be in future editions. It might be able to bring some costs initially down, and then some of them may have grown since then even. So it would be worthwhile to go through that in an abbreviated fashion for sure. We did have a couple other concepts I just wanted to share. This one had a traffic circle where the road coming in off of East Young Street was, and it kind of hit the main kind of circulation road. Again, that was pretty problematic with the fire trucks. But we changed it a little bit to work better, so for that. However, it's sort of an awkward intersection there. There's not enough room for there to be stacking. So yeah, we didn't really think that would made a whole lot of sense. It still had the niceties of the way the buildings were oriented with the nature area, but we looked at that. And then we did think about a possible another option that kind of, again, kept the buildings there, kept the driveway down, where the developer was planning to put it. We are showing it wider than they are planning to put in. I think with the traffic on this site, we would need to do that either way. But, you know, this would have some public parking in the middle. So from East Young Street, you kind of get a glimpse of that formal thing, but it's just not the same effect at all as that option 3, I don't think. So it was something we explored. But yeah, that wasn't really, I don't think that was as strong as the other one either, so. We did have one.
This one, like if you go into the library, it takes you a lot of turns to get there.
Yeah, you really do. One other comment we did get during the public comments was about whether a parking garage made sense. And if you'd reduce some of the, you know, the paving. Our goal in these, although we may not be showing it yet, would be to try to make them lushly landscaped and maybe some of the stormwater's handled within it, so it feels like more like a little rain gardens, and try to keep it not feel like a sea of parking. Parking decks are very expensive, so this doesn't mean you couldn't do it. But, you know, if you start out with a smaller phase 1, you know, it wouldn't make sense to put the deck in now. Any of these, potentially that could be an option in the future too. So, but also the distributing of people, how far would you have to go from that to certain buildings? You know, it's almost like it would have to be a central feature to have good convenience. But anyways, that was something also discussed, and we did talk about it a little bit beyond that in-house. So I think we can go back through any of this, or I can just keep going through and then we can come back if you'd like. I've got some cost estimate information next.
I just have one question.
Yeah.
On that concept 3, the parking for the town hall building, I know this is just a concept,
Yeah.
but would that be close enough, the parking close enough for someone with a handicap not to have an issue to get inside the building?
Yeah, our intent would be that the spaces, let me see if I can show you with my arrow, that the spaces here would be accessible, and then we'd have some accessible spaces sort of here too, which also for the community center, you'd want to have a bunch close there. But I mean, that could be shaped, you know, and our thought is that there's not just a front door. If anything, that there might be a lot of access from this side, and that might be like a hallway, kind of a grand hallway through the center or something, kind of front to back. But yeah, I think the intent would be that any accessible parking would have close access from the back side. That's a good question, though. Okay. So I've got a little more detail after this, but this was information that was provided to Davenport that we had worked on with our myself and our professional cost estimator. And we did this in an interesting way so that when we get, the next step will be kind of working with the financial piece and figure out phasing, maybe some phasing options for you guys. And so in doing so, we included cost for site work around these buildings. So almost as if they were on their own site. And that isn't all the site costs, because there'll be for the main road and utilities and the bridges, let's say, and other landscaping. So there's additional site costs. But we did that so that if we pulled one out for now and it was in a future phase, it would be a little easier to reconcile the budget. But so these numbers do include a lot of site costs in there. And again, it's based off of that square footage that was discussed, you know, previously. Total building costs include additional things beyond what the contractor gets paid. They include, we'll go over that in a second, but there's other costs associated with a project that need to be accounted for. So we just kind of broke it out. And police and fire are actually surprisingly close in cost. The community center, again, that was based on 16,000 square foot size. In your studies, you had a pretty large one. I think it was in the 40,000 square foot range. And then the one you guys were working on in one of the developments was a little smaller. Yeah. So this is based off the smaller one. So certainly, you know, anything bigger would be more. But and then I mentioned general site costs. So there's just additional costs, you know, putting in all your fire hydrants and water lines and roads and the bridges and development of the wetland areas, things like that, site lighting, benches, just lots of other things, right? So while the building areas kind of cover a lot of the costs, there's still some other site costs associated with something this scale. This is a little more detail, is broken out a little bit. So, like for example, in each of these, we focused on a building cost, and that includes the site, associated with it, and based on the size. We do have some contingency built in there. You could always argue to keep going on contingencies. The last 3 years have been brutal with construction costs. But, we have this, we set this up for 2025 costs. So as we do the phasing plans, we may do some projections for future phased items to increase the contingencies for when they would be built. But that's one thing. Another thing I didn't put in there, but I did list, it's just at zero now. These are all as if they were bid, just regular bid jobs. There is another process that's being used a lot right now, especially with lead times, and some of that is a construction manager at risk. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but you interview and hire your contractor early in early design, just like you would an architect, by qualifications, and then they'd give you a fee for their pre-construction services, and then assuming you still enjoyed working with them, then they would be open book and they would bid out for multiple contractors and they would be in charge. So I didn't include that. It does cost more. They have work up front, they do, and typically they're pre-qualifying all the subcontractors. The nice thing about that is you're getting better subcontractors. With a bid project, you get the low bid, basically, and that's the person that gets it. That does bring the cost down, though. That's the plus side of that. So I did put that in there. I just didn't include it in the budget numbers. They were already plenty high. So you have kind of the construction subtotals, and then owner's soft costs are another thing. And they vary a little bit from building to building, but that would be like all your design fees. It would be all your furnishings, like town halls are more furnishing intensive. Police typically are too. Fire a little less, but fire also has like some radio alerting and some other things that can add costs that you need to account for. So there's always a soft cost, and that gets you to those total numbers that you saw on the previous page. But just wanted to explain that a little bit, how we did that. So the fire station, we got the soft costs. It's a little lower, not quite as much furniture as some of those other building types.
It looks like everything has a 10% contingency.
We do for now, yeah. Because we haven't even designed anything, or, we haven't done, geotechnical work out inside. There's so many variables still ahead, yep. And to get us to that 2025 kind of date too. So again, as we start working on the phasing plans and we start to say, well, this makes sense. Maybe these first two buildings would be the first two, and maybe they're separated by a couple of years, and then we'll help project if it's beyond the 2025. We'll help look at those numbers too. I think that'll be helpful. But for right now, it's just as if we were doing it all, and then we can modify that as we look at the financial piece and all that. So, and then this was just also looking at. So I told you about sort of just the extra site costs that are beyond these building sites. This is just kind of a breakdown. It's a little more detail. It's helpful for me to think through it, and for our estimator too, to try to think about some of the things we'd have. We have some wetland mitigation in here that may not be needed in this option 3. So that, that was 500,000. So I mean, that, there may be things that can go away too. Anyways, so we have some breakout on that. Before I go to next steps, do y'all want to go back and look at option 3, the video, some of that a little more, or talk about anything that's on your mind about what you've seen so far?
I just have a question back to, is there any reason why the owner soft cost for the fire station and the community center is 18% versus the police station and town hall being 20%?
Yeah, it has a lot to do with the furniture, actually. In a fire station, the furnishings are a lot less.
Okay.
police station and town halls are furniture extensive. So like the workstations that you would buy to go in an office, those can be like $12,000 a piece. They can be very expensive. So that adds up on a town hall and a police station more. There's less of that in a fire station. And same thing with like a community center. You may have some areas, like some senior areas or something that would have some soft seating and all, but your office area is usually a little smaller and things like that. And it's more like big open spaces often with gyms and all that. So that was just sort of the initial thought there, why those were a little less, yeah.
What kind of issues did you guys come up with? Is there anything like it kind of stood out that would be an issue you'd see up front?
Well, I think getting our head around, the potential of how to work with the wetlands.
Okay.
I think we've gotten there on that. I think the traffic flow was really a great comment during the community meetings. There were people that were involved with the fire department, and we weren't done.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that there were some turning radius things that needed to be worked out, but I think we've resolved a lot of those things. DOT getting good feedback initially is awesome, but getting good feedback all the way through is
Right.
important. But these are people that were familiar with you guys, so I think that's good.
Okay.
So, budget's always a concern. I think you're going to hear more about that coming up. So I think it'll be something that, Kelly, you guys will have to kind of meld their information and your other needs and help us figure out what kinds of budgets we're looking at to help you guys with the phasing plans. But our intent is to, if you guys feel comfortable with option 3, we would want to refine that a little more. Our civil engineer, our site designers, they're going to start looking at like some stormwater requirements, a little more detail, a little more of the drives, and making sure that ADW is a traffic designer is right. So we have a little bit more to do on that. But we wanted to get it narrowed down. So if y'all like option 3, we'll continue to fine tune that and focus on that. Budget's always a big one, right? So we'll refine that if we get more information on the site, stormwater, for example. If we have to put some of the stormwater under the parking lots, things like that, that can add some costs. We'll tweak the estimates a little bit as we have more detail. So
Thank you.
those are the main things, I think. Just keep refining and, kind of uncovering any remaining things that we need to focus on.
As for the site costs, the whole site has to be done, even if one building is going in, is that my understanding? You would
To some degree, yeah. I mean, it might be able to be done in some phases too, as far as some of the pathways and or little pedestrian bridges, some things like that. It might be that half of the pedestrian bridges go in phase 1, and then maybe a future phase, more of them happen. So there's some flexibility. Certainly that road configuration is definitely different than what the developer has planned. They have a kind of just what they need road going at the bottom of the site straight out. I think there's been some discussions that we'd figure out the value of that and the value of what we're adding to that, and it would be equitable kind of swapping of efforts there. But
And you hadn't gotten far enough in discussions with the library people to understand if they're going to have any site input in the site costs, anything like that?
We have not. That is the next thing we need to do, is start really talking about that relationship and whether they paying for and what's the expectations,
yeah, and we'll keep communicating with them. Our site designers are the site designers for that project too, which is very convenient actually. That's more of a discussion at a different level to iron some of that out. So as I mentioned, I think our thought would be, if you guys are liking option 3, that seemed where the center of mass was going, and we'd like to just focus on that and refine it. If you have feedback today or later, it's a lot to to look at all at once. So we can try to incorporate some thoughts you may have into that too. And then I think as Kelly will have more on the finances, and we can work together to figure out phasing plans. And so we'll plan to kind of draw this in those plans, well, what if this project didn't happen for a little bit and these two started or whatever. We've had some of those discussions on preferences up front. But I think, obviously the financial piece is going to start to weigh in on the reality of how much can we do up front and all that. So we would like to come back to you guys with these phasing plans and budgets, kind of helping to guide and map out what might be possible for you guys. We also had talked that there may be a need to present to the county commissioners, particularly on the library, and particularly if they're going to be paying some of the extra site and all that, right? So we're happy to play whatever role is helpful there. And then, I think once we get through that and any final revisions you guys have, we can kind of wrap it up and put a bow on the master planning part. And
Yeah, couple things. You may want to think about how you do the county commissioners, because they rely on that library commission input from them. I know they meet monthly. Maybe best to not bypass them to start with. So, because that's their job, I think. They make decisions on what the recommendation to the county commissioners are when you do a library. So be careful, think about how you want to do that, because I think the library commission should be involved in it somehow.
well, we've been working pretty closely with their project team, so I would assume we'll keep discussing that path.
Right. The staff should
What's
hopefully
helpful.
direct us right way, and the MOU that we signed does not include that step, but that's a very thoughtful step that we probably need to bring to the staff and say, what's their role? So we make sure that we don't miss that. So I think that's a good point.
And I don't know if they may have been sharing some of this, that we've had a couple meetings with them already. I don't know. But yeah, that's a great point, and we'll see if there's other parties there that need to be brought along.
I don't think they know the details that I think they know it's a site and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think they know the details.
They have, they've had discussions about it because they have determined a size. It's a little larger of a library than some. I think they were looking at about 12,000 square feet on this site, and they have plenty of others that are smaller. They were visualizing this being a little bit bigger. And that probably was part of their going in for their budget requests for the building. So, yeah, we can meet with however they want to proceed, so.
And I guess the other thing you need, which I don't see up there, you need a decision from the board on the site. So,
Yeah.
Where do you want to fit that in there? That probably need to be at a business meeting rather than a work session, so.
So the thought tonight is that we could do it that way, or you could give us guidance and let him continue working on 3, come back August 15th, conclude that conversation, and then I do agree that there should be some endorsement of a site plan, and so that would be probably done by resolution or something. So our thought, as we talked about this and we laid it out, is that coming out of August 15th, if you all were ready to go based upon what was presented, and generally, we would follow up then with a resolution of adopting site plan option 3 sometime either in September or thereabouts. Then that would conclude the site plan work. And then that's where we put the effort on what to do next after that, how to implement it.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit. Maybe start with April. What are your thoughts of the sites? Can you give them direction?
I thought 3 was my favorite one, but didn't we have a discussion and determine that at the last meeting? Did I make that up?
I think we were leaning towards Site 3 last meeting, and it had to go to the public thing, and then we
Okay.
weren't going to decide until it come back from there.
That's what I recall, that you guys wanted to get input.
Yeah.
From-
And you didn't,
from
you
the
weren't
community
sure Site
first.
3 would work 'cause of
Yeah, we weren't
DOT.
sure. We hadn't met with DOT yet, so that was part of it. And then we got some valuable feedback with the fire trucks and the routing. And so I think we've addressed that too in that one. So kind of the boogeymen have gone away on 3 now, and it looks cleaner and ready to
Do you
happen.
feel comfortable him going on, working
I
on Site
do,
3?
because when I was looking at all of these, I was looking at the fire department to see how would they get out, and I was looking at the roundabouts and all of that when we looked at these. And just to know that they can get in and out, and I think, to me, it's the most appealing plan out there.
I like the flow, traffic flow. I should have said that. Should get your opinion first. Paul, what do you think?
So I like it as well. I think the two parts stood out to me was obviously the entrance. Like you want to have a major entrance and actually make it make sense and look nice for your town. But I think the bigger thing is the wetlands. I didn't want those touched. I actually want to add to them, you know, as you were talking about. So I think that appeals to me. And then also I know Daniel say something about it too, but the Veterans Memorial, I feel like that's a nice spot. I think it makes sense. It's away from traffic and, like you said, it's visible, but it's a serene area. So I think it's a nice setup. I like this layout.
Dan, any comments?
I'm gonna ditto what Paul said about the Veterans Memorial. But overall, sir, I just had an idea because you show us a lot of benches in there. And one of the concepts that I wanted to have was turning those benches into memorial benches.
Oh, that'd be nice, yeah.
Definitely for Mayor Eagles and as well as our fire chief, Chief Privet. So if you could also put that down as a note, and then maybe we can come up with something now with the water feature that the mayor was talking about. I think with the connection of the town hall as well as the community center, it should be easy to tie in the water lines
Yeah.
to have some kind of reflection pool
Reflection.
in that area.
Yeah, I like that idea, yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Anything else?
No, sir.
Okay. You got any closing thoughts, questions, anything?
No, I'll share we have a link for the little video thing we'll send you that's easier. You can just hit it and it goes to the internet. So it's easy to view and stuff. I'll send all that to you guys.
So you're good with, I want to just kind of conclude, if I may, Mayor, good with allowing Keith to take option 3, continue working through it. He'll sit and listen to the finance conversation. I'm not certain how we'll do the phasing components. We will report out to the library, because I think it's a good time to start talking about how do we get in front of the commissioners and start working on an agreement with them. And we'll kind of target that August 15th to come back to you and give you an update and maybe enough to be able to move forward to start concluding this effort after that work session. So, does that sound like a good plan?
Yes, sir.
It does.
It's been a good process. I think we've had lots of ideas and lots of options, and it feels good that it's sort of settling into one that seems to be most liked, so it's good.
Yeah. Only, my last question, I read somewhere in looking at the material that there was a space for expansion or something. Was
Yeah,
that-
most all of these buildings, you'll see kind of like a lighter shade of yellow. We've tried to leave room for building expansion in certain areas, so that we would, again, as we go through and verify the space needs for each group, we'll fine tune what they really need in the first phase and maybe the first 10 or 15 years. But then there may be some stuff down the road they're going to need, or, you know, town hall would need to have room to grow. We just want to make sure in this master plan we leave room for those type things. It may be that it's a little smaller first building and then a little bigger expansion building. So we just wanted to make sure we did that. And so all of the spaces have some room to grow.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't understand. So it's kind of building, it's not like
Yeah.
expanding, you could put another building somewhere.
No, we're pretty maxed out with all of these. So again, based on the phasing plans, it may not look that built out for a little while. Certain parts may and certain parts may be coming, in the future.
Yeah, it looks like it's a lot of open space and a lot of activity space and stuff. I don't know what our numbers are, but we'll find that out. But I think it's a good job. So appreciate it, board. Thank you. Hope you got direction.
Can I ask Keith one last question? I just
Yeah.
thought of, Keith. I don't see, did you include a price if that road comes in from that
I
secondary
did.
road?
Yeah, in that
Is there-
extra site page, if you look at the detail on it,
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure I had.
okay, we can talk. I didn't see it in here, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, revisions to the developer road. I had another 400,000 in there.
That's the developer road.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the one that's coming
Oh,
out.
no, we did not include that
So
at
if
this
that
point.
stays on the CTP and is required, that is not in your cost.
It is not in these estimates for that other road that potentially would go to Main Street, right?
Okay. I just thought of that. I didn't see that, so.
Yeah, if we ended up needing to do a bridge or something, that could be pretty expensive. And I felt like we had enough going already that maybe that could not be, it didn't need to be in this first
You
look.
do have a greenway component potentially throughout that would connect all these adjacent properties probably that are undeveloped?
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of pathways, so
Okay.
I think that's still within these numbers. We had,
That walkway, 1.8 million?
yeah, we had a lot of money in there for all the nice paths and bridges and
So
little
minimally,
things.
you
little
would, you would
things.
recommend connecting that parcel with the greenway, I'm assuming, if it's on the greenway plan also?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay.
That makes great sense. Connectivity with bikes, hiking and walking, whatever, it just would be a great amenity, I mean, to the town to be able to come here and
Yeah.
on the weekends. Some things will be busy and some things won't, I mean.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there,
Yeah.
I just saw that and I want to make sure I asked that before we get going, so. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks, Keith.
All right,
We'll
great.
see, we'll probably get this back on August 15th. You can hit that schedule, you think, Keith, to bring back
Yep.
something August? Okay.
yep, we'll have to get together
Yep.
on, well, I'll stay and listen to everything tonight on the finances, but I know there's more to it than just that, so. It's
Mayor,
great.
if you give us a chance, a minute, Mitch will come up and we'll switch spots. We'll just take one, pass it on. How's that? Take one, too. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You charge an extra for this?
Yeah. Oh. Well, shoot. Can you give that to Robin and hang on to those for Michelle and Sheila?
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members. Appreciate you all having me this evening. Keith mentioned the financial piece is all.
Yourself, if you don't.
I apologize. Mitch Bergoglio with Davenport and Company. We're the town's financial advisor. And I know Keith mentioned the financial aspect of it and potential phasing. You all have seen the capital improvement plan analysis over the years. It's been updated and revised, and you all have taken steps in the past to continue funding that. And so this is an update of that CIP plan, which incorporates the cost estimates that Keith provided you all for the town hall facilities. And we've worked closely with staff to go through some initial scenarios and potential phasing approaches. And we've got sort of one option in here for you this evening to give you a sense of the potential cost, budgetary impacts of this town hall, as well as the remainder of the CIP. So my thought this evening was, y'all have seen a lot of this information before. It is updated. I may go through it rather quickly, but if y'all want me to slow down, have questions along the way, please feel free, interrupt. Happy to make this conversational. Again, if you want me to slow down, I'm happy to do that. But big picture on the front end, I wanted to talk about one of the updates that we've incorporated into this planning process. And I know, Mr. Mayor, this is something that you've mentioned along the way over the years. Staff has put together using a projection of the tax base into future years. And this is using information that planning has on developments that are underway in zoning and in the planning process. And it's their best estimate of how these potential developments may come online and grow the tax base into the future. So big picture, over the last 10 years or so, you've averaged tax base growth of a little over 11%. So your assessed value, your property tax base has grown at a little over 11% per year for the last 10 years. If you exclude the revaluation years, right, revaluation can skew those growth numbers. Even taking out the revaluation years, your growth has averaged almost 10.4% a year. So, and I think, Mr. Mayor, that's what you've said historically. We're going to see a lot of growth. We've seen a lot of growth. So based upon, with that as background, the estimates that staff prepared for the real property tax base growth, and this is based upon, forecast residential and commercial developments, averages out to about 13.4% between 2025 and 29. Starting in 2030, we back it back down to sort of an inflationary 2.5% growth rate. But in sort of that clearly defined 5-year period, the average growth is about 13.4%. And then for personal property, public utilities, and vehicles, we're growing that at 5% per year for the first 5 years, and then drop it back down to a 2.5% growth rate. These growth projections do not factor in any potential impact for future revaluations, right? Because we don't know what the decision process will be in the future related to revenue neutral or not. So this is what we refer to as natural tax base growth, new developments coming in. And so these projections of property tax base are going to be built into our analysis going forward. It's going to impact the value of 1 penny generates on your real estate tax and your personal property tax rate. It's going to impact your assumed assessed value base going forward. So all that's going to be baked into the analysis. And we'll get into that in a little more detail. But I felt like that was important to hit on the front end because that's going to flow through a number of elements of our analysis.
Just to make sure I understand the projections, there's a lot of known, we know a couple of big mixed use coming in, 2 or 3 of those. And it's, we got quite a few units that has been approved that we know. So is this based somewhat on the known and the unknown, or just the known and maybe a factor of the unknown or something?
Yeah, I mean,
Do you want Amy to explain her spreadsheet?
I mean, and I will say, just as Amy's walking up here, there's a little more detail behind this slide. You'll see on the next slide, there's a little more detail by category. And in the appendix, you can actually see the details of the developments that you're talking about, and the assumptions is behind Appendix B.
Yes, yeah, so that page 24 is what Mitch was referring to. That is the basis of this analysis. Primarily, it is based off of known projects. So some of the known big commercial items that have been approved and are underway, as well as some known residential, both single-family and multifamily developments.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at it, it appeared that at some point we know, like you said, and then once it gets out to 29, 30 and all, it looks like it's just a factor ratio in there.
Yes.
Is that fair
Yeah,
to
so
say?
what happened is that they sort of plotted out, say, okay, here's a development, it's got 200 homes. They're going to pull X number of permits per year for the next few years.
Right.
So given that this is based off of known projects, by the time we got to year 5, 6, we sort of ran out of permits. And so that's where we fell back to that traditional
That factor
growth. Yep.
makes sense.
I'd like to comment on this while I have them opportunities. Between Amy, Michael McFarland, Michael Ellenberger, this spreadsheet is a wonderment. They really did, they got in it. We spent a fair amount of time on that screen right there, talking about it, working through it, talking about what is our assessment when these can be built out. And Amy and that group really did a good job of putting together an assessment. So this is, I think, what you talked about, Mary, you wanted something like this. I think it's really beneficial to the
Yeah.
estimating for all of us, so.
Yeah, but I think, for example, we got no development on the belt line yet, or the bypass. So all that would be additional probably. Or maybe some of it fall in that little factor out there, but
Right.
Question, are these numbers also factor in our current town tax base?
Yep, yes, sir. So it's your current tax base and then the new projected development on top of that. That's what's making up the light gray bars, which are the projected bars. So the colored bars are your actual or budgeted tax base that exists today. And then the light gray bars are the projections.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we can come back to this. It's going to flow through the analysis, but wanted to hit that. And then just as a sort of quick refresher on the existing debt profile, a couple concepts. Page 7 has your existing tax-supported debt outstanding. It's about $7.6 million as of June 30th, 2023. And you can see it's stepping down over time, such that, you know, you got a very nice step down in your existing debt profile from 28 to 29, and then there's another big drop from 31 to 32. That's going to provide some built-in capacity in the future within that existing debt profile. But you've got $7.6 million of debt outstanding right now, and talking about 4 potential town campus buildings on top of the other CIP. So that's going to evolve and change if you choose to fund all of those projects. Page 8, one of the other concepts that we've talked about over the years are a series of key debt ratios, and the potential to, when you do begin to start to fund some of these larger projects, considering some debt-related financial policies, putting those in place, so as you take on the existing debt, you're kind of doing that within some parameters. But right now, at the $7.6 million, all of your key debt ratios are in very good shape and would be within or below or above the relevant policy ranges. So, for example, on the far left, the 10-year payout ratio is a measure of what percentage of your principal outstanding, the $7.6 million, are you repaying in the first 10 years? And you all are up at nearly 70% of your principal being retired within the first 10 years currently, and that's improving over time. So that's a very healthy level to be at. Typical policy ranges is, you know, in the 50 to 60% range is a typical policy range. Most people fall into that 50% policy level for this. So you're in very good shape. Higher is better in this case for the 10-year payout ratio. In the middle is debt to assessed value. So your debt outstanding as a percentage of your property tax base. And typical policy ranges are in the 2 to 3% range. You all are at under 0.5% right now. So we have good capacity under that policy. And then on the far right, debt service to expenditures, your annual debt service payment as a percentage of your total governmental budget. Policy ranges typically span from 15 to 20% on this ratio. Y'all are under 10%, so in very good shape. Now, one of the things I will tell you is this far right ratio, debt service to expenditures, for a town like yourselves, a growing town, growing community, this is the one we often see a lot of the most pressure on this ratio as you're growing, when you start to build infrastructure, you have to build infrastructure for what you have now, but also what you see in the future. So oftentimes this debt service to expenditures ratio, at least in the earlier years, can be pressured. But starting out, you're in very good shape right now on these various ratios.
Mitch, would you spend some time on the green box?
Yeah. So we've talked about this over the years, but particularly as you consider funding potentially some of these town campus facilities, going to require taking on additional debt and larger amounts of debt than you have in the past. And so might be the right time to consider putting some of these financial policies related to debt in place in conjunction with funding of some of those facilities, preferably before you get into the debt issuance process. So, whether you go directly to a bank or you have to talk to the rating agencies to issue bonds in the public markets, that just provides a level of comfort to outside parties that you're doing it in a responsible fashion. But I think it also helps you all and your citizens make sure that as you're funding this plan, you're doing it in a responsible fashion as well.
So you recommend adopting the red bars? Is that kind of what you are?
Well, I think what we want to do is get into the CIP process a little more, and we're going to get into the first cut of that here momentarily, and see how things evolve. But we may choose to adopt all three ratios. We may choose to adopt two and a target for a third. I think there's a couple of different options, and we just kind of would want to get some of your feedback on these initial CIP scenarios, and moving forward, maybe as we move into the planning work for these projects and into maybe the budget sessions, consider putting those policies in place maybe as part of the next budget once we get some more feedback from you all and develop a more clear phasing plan for these projects. I don't know, and Kelly, unless you have other thoughts on that.
I just want to make sure we understood it.
So how do they play into the bond rating?
So they're one factor, and they factor into a couple different areas. Each of the rating agencies.
Don't have a bond rating.
You do not have a bond rating right now, but there's three prominent national rating agencies: Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch Ratings. Moody's and S&P are the two most typical, followed by Fitch. They each have their own methodologies that they use, but all of them look at the debt or leverage, is sometimes what they refer to it as at least 10% of their rating methodology. So on one hand, policies will help you stay within reasonable ranges on debt and leverage, but they also support another key component of their rating methodologies, which can range from 10 to 20%, and that's the management score. And so having policies helps you, with that management score. It's just that you all are putting guidelines in place and institutionalizing good financial practices. That's a positive to your overall management score. So we think policies are a benefit. Again, whether we're going to the bond ratings or going to potential banks as lenders, either way, we think it's a positive to have those in place when we get to the point of actually funding some of these projects.
The debt ratios, do they favor anything with the LGC? Or?
The LGC does look at them, and in particular, debt service to expenditures is one that I've seen them focus on more recently. But the LGC, in my experience, has been much more focused on sort of the next aspect that we're going to talk about is the affordability and your repayment plan for the debt. And so these ratios are often what we refer to as debt capacity, right? Within these ratios, you're in a very good shape. You have capacity to consider taking on additional debt and still look good or be in a reasonable range within these ratios. The related but different question is the affordability. Do you have the cash flow available to pay for it within your current budget, or what additional revenues do you need to help make the annual payments? Often I think about it as, you're going to buy a house and you can get pre-qualified for a $100,000 mortgage. The bank will say, yes, I'll lend that to you. But when you sit down and you start to sketch out your budget, you got your, electric bills, you may have some student loans you're repaying, you may have some other commitments, and all of a sudden, when you're doing the math about your monthly income, you say, well, I can't afford that $100,000 mortgage. The bank will give it to me, but within my spending habits, I don't have the ability to pay for that. So the two are related. Your ratios say, yeah, you could issue a certain amount of debt and look good. You could get that pre-approval from the bank. But when it comes down to it, is it something you feel like you can afford on a monthly basis is the other consideration. And so that's what we're going to get into here. I'm not going to spend too much time on page 9. We've talked about some of this in the past, but just want to set this up at a high level. You really have 4 key revenue sources that you all have identified over the years as being available to pay for this capital program. You have your current general fund debt service budget. You're paying your existing debt from your current general fund, and that's an amount of $700,000. That's baked into your budget currently. You can continue funding at that level without the need for additional resources. You've got your capital savings fund that you all have taken steps to set aside pennies on the tax rate to go towards this capital savings fund. It's up to 3.5 cents as of the fiscal year 24 budget. And that's built up a fund balance over the years. It's about $1.3 million sitting in that fund. You've got park impact fees that you're charging. Those would be available to fund parks and recreation related projects. And you've got the street fees that could be available to fund transportation-related projects. And then there are some other one-time revenues that we have incorporated in here. Some ARPA funding, which we know what some of that has been earmarked to fund, but those are the ARPA revenue replacement dollars that remain, about $1.2 million. And then excess general fund balance. This is a new concept, but this is, you had a couple nice years of sales tax, have built up some general fund balance. So this is an estimate of what we think is available over and above the town policy targets that could be made available to go towards the capital plan. So when we take all those revenue sources and compare them to your existing debt service, that's on page 10. This is kind of the baseline for our affordability analysis. I do want to just refresh you on this quickly. This is a summarized version, but your CIP requirements are in columns B through F. And right now, we just have the existing general fund debt service. We haven't layered in the CIP. We haven't talked about that yet. But we do have placeholders for the proposed debt service. That would be new bond issuances, new debt issuances, and the payments associated with those would go in column C. Pay-as-you-go capital, cash-funded capital would go in column D. And then column E is a placeholder for CIP operating impact. We have been focused on funding the capital side of things. Pay-as-you-go capital, debt-funded capital, the large projects. But we recognize that there's another side of the budget, the operating budget. And some of these capital projects could impact the operating side, right? You have new facilities, they may be larger to accommodate growth. They may have some additional costs associated with them. There may be some savings associated with getting rid of leased facilities that could factor into the operating budget. You build a new park, you've got to operate that park. Those type of things can all impact the operating budget. We're not factoring in operating impacts in our analysis. We're focused on the capital funding side. And so just want to make sure to point that out. And so that all totals up into column F. And then columns G through L are the revenues available. And so these are what we just talked about. The general fund budgeted debt service at $700,000 a year. Sorry. That's already in your budget, and you can continue budgeting that without having to come up with any new resources. Column H is the existing capital savings fund tax rate of 3.5%, 3.5 cents. And you'll see that's growing over time. right? Because we've assumed your property tax base is growing over time. So as your property tax base grows from that natural growth and development, the value of a penny increases, therefore 3.5 cents generates more revenue over time. And then columns I and J are your park impact fees and your street impact fees. Right now, the park impact fees are being used to pay for the 2017 installment financing contract that you put in place, but nothing else beyond that. Same thing with the street fee fund balance. You don't see any dollars in there. That's because we haven't started funding the CIP yet. We don't have eligible dollars to spend those on. But when we fund the CIP, we'll start to fill those columns in. Okay? And then we've got our other one-time revenues that we talked about over in column K, total revenues available in column L, and then column M simply shows you what the annual dollars are that are available. That's our starting point for our affordability. Now, remember, we're gonna have some street impact fees, some park impact fees that we'll add to that when we have the eligible projects. So you've got capacity. Based upon the steps you've taken, you've got some affordability. The question is gonna be, based upon your current CIP, do you have enough, or are there additional supplements that are gonna be needed if you choose to fund all of the projects? So that's where we're gonna go next. And I know this is getting small, I apologize, but we wanted to get it all on here for you. And what we've shown you here is an approach that we've worked on with staff for phasing of some of these projects, and identifying funding sources that could be used to fund the various projects. So the top half of the chart through line 20 is your projects. We call it the uses of funds. And it's broken down into 3 categories. The first being facilities. And line 2 is an HVAC replacement that's needed for this facility. And then after that, it is projects associated with the new town campus. The general site construction, that's assumed to happen first and being funded in fiscal year 2025. The idea being, and Keith can tell us more about this if we did this phasing right, but the idea being you got to do the general site work, A, for the library, and B, so that you can start to build these other projects in. So do the general site work first. And then in fiscal year 26, we have the police station and town hall programmed in. We spent a lot of time with staff looking at alternative scenarios and can we improve things if we start to delay some of these projects? What if we phase out police and town hall more? Was that help the results? And what we found is, in our analysis, is we are assuming a 4.5% inflationary growth rate in these project costs. And I think, Keith, that's kind of a general indication of what you might have had.
Hopefully. Yeah, the last 3 years have been way worse than that, but yeah, if we get back to some normal.
So with that inflationary growth rate, on the one hand, deferring a project later helps you build resources to be able to fund that project. On the other hand, deferring it is increasing the project cost. Yeah. And so what we found for these 2 projects in particular, when we were looking at funding these first, police and town hall, as we were delaying those projects, deferring those projects, it wasn't having a big impact on the overall results. Because of that inflationary growth. So the idea was, let's go ahead and program those in and get them done, because delaying them is not having a big impact. And then we've got the fire station, the last line 5, programmed in as the last project of the town campus in 2032. Next, lines 8 through 13 are streets and sidewalks related projects. And those are all getting done. These are what's on the 5-year CIP. This is everything getting done in the first 5 years. And then Parks and Recreation is the last group. And there's some projects that you all are funding in the fiscal year 24 budget. That's goes through line 19, or excuse me, line 18. And then Line 19, I want to point this out. So we're calling this the Farm Park Phase 1 or other recreation projects that you choose to fund. It's basically an $8 million budget for a Parks and Recreation project. Just so happened to line up pretty cleanly with the prior estimates for the Farm Park Phase 1, but you may have other priorities that you choose to fund. That was kind of a flexible CIP item for us. It was $8 million for a Parks and Recreation project in fiscal '25. And then line 15, the community center, that's that last building for the town campus, that's assumed to get funded in fiscal year 2030. So kind of bringing it back to the town campus project, the phasing for that project is that we've assumed in this analysis is the $8.5 million, $8.45 million for the general site work. As soon as that's complete, the following fiscal year, it's funding police and town hall in fiscal '26. Then you take a little bit of a break and you get to the community center in fiscal '30, and then the fire station in fiscal '32. As you all know, we don't have the library on here. There's some general site construction work that goes towards supporting that, but it's assumed that you all are not responsible for funding the library project. And then we've got our funding sources down below that. Really, the bulk of this is getting funded with proposed debt issuance, and that's $85.5 million of proposed debt. Remember, we had $7.6 million right now, so it's a pretty significant increase. But these are these are large projects, and they're long-term projects that are not 5-year type projects. They are going to be around for a long time. So the idea is you pay for them over an assumed 20-year period of time. And you can see page 13 shows you how that debt service comes online with the assumed additional $85 million worth of debt. The dark green bars are your existing debt, right? You're paying about $1 million a year on your existing debt. That would step up to by 2035, it's almost $8 million of an annual payment. But you're also growing. The rest of your budget is going to grow as well, and the town is going to grow with that. The debt ratios on page 14. So a couple things here. Your 10-year payout ratio and your debt to assessed value stay within those potential policy ranges that we're talking about. I alluded to this earlier. The debt service to expenditures does get above the potential higher end of that policy range. We've seen others do this as well, and there's a lot of assumptions that go into that. We've got 5% interest rates. If we do better on the debt service, a lower interest rate helps the annual payment. That could bring this down. Additional growth over and above the property tax growth assumed, particularly in those outer years, Mr. Mayor, like you were saying, would help this ratio. Growth in the sales tax and overall increase in your budget would improve the results here. So I think it's something to definitely keep an eye on and be aware of, but will evolve over time. So we're going to come back to this, but I also want to hit on the affordability for you. And we've looked at 3 different scenarios, same debt service being funded in all of them, and cut to the chase, your existing revenues are not going to be sufficient to pay. I suspect y'all assumed that already. But we've looked at 3 different ways for how you could build up the new revenues needed to pay for it. And page 15 is kind of our base scenario. And what we say is, we are assuming in this sort of base scenario, we call it the natural impact, that you come up with the revenues when you need to. You don't raise them early, you don't come up with revenues early, you don't set money aside leading up to when you need it. It's just whenever you need it, we assume you fund it in that year. So let me just quickly tell you what's changed. So column C, we've layered in the new debt service. And then column D is some pay-as-you-go capital during that first 5-year CIP period. We have pulled in columns I and J, we maxed out our use of the park impact fees and the street fee fund balance. If we've got eligible projects, we're using that money first. But there is, for example, on the street fee, there is additional dollars available over and above what we were able to use. And then column M, the surplus deficit, you saw that was positive before, right? Well, now that's negative. And you see it starts to go negative in fiscal year 2026. That's your first year where you got a shortfall. But you've built up some capital reserve over in column R that can be used to fund that shortfall. So the first couple of years of shortfalls that occur in 26 and 27, you're able to offset with built up reserves, that capital savings fund that you've set aside. You're able to cover those deficits in this scenario. And then in 2028 is the first year you would be about $2.9 million short, but you'd only have $700,000 in the capital savings fund. So you've got to come up with the equivalent of $2.2 million in that year. And based upon our assumed projections for the tax base, that would equate to roughly 8.5 cents on the property tax rate. Now remember, that doesn't factor in any changes due to future revaluations or anything, but based upon the current tax rate plus the growth that has been assumed, it would be the equivalent of about 8.5 cents there in 2028. And then you can see as you continue to fund projects into the future, there are some additional impacts such that by fiscal year 33, it would be an overall impact of about 18 pennies, not factoring in any changes due to revaluation. Okay, so that's the sort of the natural impact starting out if you just come up with the revenue as late as possible, exactly when you need it. Sort of the other end of the spectrum is what happens if you said fiscal year 25, we're going to come up with what we need to come up with to fund this plan. And fiscal year 25 is a revaluation year. So that may create some opportunities to consider doing that. And so what we see here is if you came up with the equivalent of $3.8 million of new revenue, or the equivalent of about 12 pennies, that could fund this town campus plus the other CIP related projects. So 3.8 million needed of new revenue, and that's assumed to grow over time with the tax base, which is the equivalent, if you came up with it all on the property tax rate, of about 12 pennies. Okay? The third option is kind of acknowledging, you have, during this period of time in which you're funding town campus, there are 2 revaluation periods, right? Where you're going to potentially see significant changes in the revaluation of the tax base. So what if we spread the impact out, the budgetary impact out, over the next 2 revaluation cycles? Well, if you were to do that, you would have, we've calculated that you would need $1.34 million of a new revenue in fiscal 25, followed by an additional $1.34 million. So you get to a total of $2.68 million by fiscal year 2029. So that's spreading it out over the next 2 revaluation cycles, 2025 and 2029, $1.34 million added to the budget every year, and is assumed that revenue would grow consistent with the property tax rate, property tax base. Put that in perspective for the reval for fiscal year 2025. Amy and I were talking about some rough numbers. Your fiscal year 24 property tax base is going to generate approximately $7 million. So a 10% revaluation change, if you did not lower that, if you maintain the same 46-cent tax rate, 10% revaluation would generate about $700,000 of new revenue. 12% 20%, 1.4, 30%, 2.1 million. I think your last revaluation was maybe a roughly 20%. I'll look that up. But so that's kind of perspective on coming up with this new revenue. Doesn't have to necessarily all come from new pennies. It could come from existing pennies if you don't go revenue neutral through the revaluation cycle. But as I mentioned earlier, there's also going to be the operating budget component that you've got to consider, and there may be some needs on the operating side as well. But those are kind of sort of two ends of the spectrum. You wait to come up with the revenue as late as you need to, or you come up with it all in fiscal year 25, or you kind of spread it out over the next couple revaluation cycles, which kind of lines up with, you know, you're funding the first two projects in fiscal 26, and then after the next reval cycle in 29, you're doing 30 and 32. So that's the general results of the analysis. We do have it summarized for you on page 18, and you can take a look at that, kind of see it all in one place. The other thing that we've done on page 18 is acknowledging that we have assumed sort of growth in the property tax base based upon known developments, but they're not in the ground yet. They're not part of your tax base yet. So if those were delayed or deferred, or for some reason didn't happen at all, that could impact these results. So what we showed you in columns F through H was funding the exact same plan as it's laid out, but if you only had 5% growth in your property tax base over the first 5 years as opposed to roughly the 13.5%, what is that? How does that impact things, right? We wanted to make sure we put that in front of you. That said, if growth doesn't occur as quickly as possible, there's other things you can do. You don't have to fund those projects immediately, right? You could choose, if you're not growing as quickly as you thought you were, you may choose not to fund some amount of these projects. You don't have to issue the debt in fiscal year 30 or 32 or even in 26 if you haven't grown as quickly. There's a number of different levers that you can do to control this. It doesn't mean that the sensitivity case, you got to come up with more additional revenue. There's other ways to handle that, like through delaying of the bond issuances and things like that. But overall, felt like like I said, we looked at a lot of different scenarios and felt like this found a nice balance of getting projects done and started. And like I said, deferring those first two projects didn't have that big of an impact on the overall results. So felt like this was a good starting point for the conversation. Obviously, we'll need y'all's feedbacks. We'll need to work with staff and ADW on what's the proper phasing of these projects and how that could impact things. But happy to answer any questions.
So I have a dumb question.
No such thing.
The last case you had, the base case for the reevaluation year. So our last reevaluation was 4 cents to go neutral. If that was the case again this time, you have 8.3 right there. Does that, if we stayed the same, does it take 4 off of that?
Yes.
Okay.
So, man, that's not a dumb question. This is always one of the most confusing things, right? But through the revaluation cycle, your current tax levy, round numbers, $7 million, right?
Right.
If you have a 10% revaluation, you kept the same tax rate. You didn't lower it. You didn't go revenue neutral. That same 46 cents would generate roughly $770,000 more on top of what you're already doing. So that's where 10% is roughly $700,000 impact if you maintain the 46 cent tax rate. 20% would be roughly 1.4. Amy's going to kick me. There's a lot more that goes into that calculation than that, but I think it gives you a general sense of the potential impact if you
I just
hold
wanted
the
to put
tax
that out there
rate.
because it's like, So if they came back and said, you know, you need to drop 4 cents to be neutral again. So it sounds like a great idea. Let's drop the 4 cents off. But you would add the 4 cents to that 8 cents now, 12 cents for
No,
that.
the 4 cents, if you held it,
Okay.
the 8 cents will become 4 cents.
Cents, okay. But I
Which
mean,
is only half of what you need
right,
for this chart.
Right, so if we're talking about a 10% revaluation
Right.
growth, right? Approximately 4 cents.
Yep.
That could eat away at this 8 cents, take you down to the 4 cents. If you had 20%, that could potentially take care of all of it,
Yep.
not acknowledging the operating budget
right,
side.
okay.
But I think, Mr. Mayor, what you were maybe saying is then you got to do it again in fiscal '29, right? At the next revaluation cycle, you got to get another $1.34 million out of that revaluation cycle as well, because we got the community center that's going to come online and the fire station, which is assumed.
Rich, can we go back to page 12?
Please.
I just want to make sure I'm clear, board that sees this. So line 15 and 19. So 19, board, if you, Mayor, you remember you brought up, I think when we started this exercise, that you wanted to make sure that we captured $8 million that we had committed to the Cobblestone Community Center as a base starting point for recreation, so that's where the $8 million came from. So we didn't lose that. But this 14 and 19 are funded from the recreation fee, correct?
Partially.
Partially. Can you
Yeah, I don't
tell me
think-
why, what partially, what does that mean?
Well, we've maxed out the use of the recreation fees, but I'd need to double check the details, but actually I don't, I can tell you. That we're assuming the park impact fees going forward are $300,000 a year. That's not going to support
So it's gonna take some,
$20 million of debt. There's going to be supplemental,
okay.
that's part of that, the impacts that we're showing is to be able to support those as well.
So is the source debt slash recreation slash GF? Is this gonna take some general fund?
Well, it's debt, yeah, the
That
debt,
means general fund,
yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah, I was thinking we won't want to use park recreation fees anymore for debt.
Okay.
Was that, because we talked about it, because if all of a sudden we don't have anything new coming in, then we can't pay the debt. Is that true? You know,
We talked about that assumption, I don't know if that's, so I think we need to work through that assumption a little bit more on this one, just.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the idea was the 300,000 felt like a reasonably conservative estimate.
I think we're presently using some for the park.
We are. It's about 200. Presently, you're using about $240,000 a year of park impact fees to pay for the 2017 installment financing.
So if all of a sudden that went away by legislative government or something, we don't have any more impact fees. I was thinking, we have to make that up somehow.
Yeah, I mean, so if we take out that 300,000, it's going to basically add to these numbers by $300,000 of additional revenue that you'd need to come up with. That would just be additive to the impact that we're showing.
Was that 300 plus the 240? Or the 240 be gone away by the time we do?
I'm assuming that the 240's gone away by that time. You've got 6 years left to pay the $240,000. 5 years left to pay the $240,000.
Actually keeping the 240 and adding a little bit to it, basically. It is a big risk in doing impact fees, for sure.
And the 8 million, why we put other recreation, because it could be interchangeable with the community center, so that's something I'll need to talk about, right? So let's say that year 30 is not right for the community center, and you decide that's whatever. That's why we put that as the farm, getting the farm started, or other recreation opportunities. So you may want to substitute that, or I don't, those are just, that's just a thought process we had on that, but we wanted to make sure we got the $8 million, put it in here
Yeah.
as a start.
I think the idea was either do the farm, use because $8 million don't do the farm.
No, still
It just gets
14
it
million
started.
short.
Is do the farm or do the building that we were
Right.
between the pen, 8 million. But I think if I'm looking at this correctly, by the time we get to do that, it's gonna be more than $8 million for that building. It's gonna be,
Right.
Close to 11.
Yeah, I mean, I think the current cost estimate, and again, I'll look at Keith to make sure I don't quote his numbers wrong. But I think at today's dollars,
and I don't,
For the community
the
center,
community center is $9.5 million.
right, with all the
and I don't know if
soft.
you got a feel what the group thinks, farm versus the building. We probably need to talk to them a little bit about it.
Yeah, we'd have to talk more about it. I mean, I still want to phase in the farm somehow, so, I mean, they're both a needed item, obviously, but,
Right.
yeah,
So, yeah, it's,
right.
you either have to, you have to move that 11 up somewhere earlier
Right.
and play them both in.
Yeah.
But if you try to move them both along sooner than by the schedule.
Yeah. You know, one thing, and I like it, y'all did a really good job on it. But, you know, like you talking about the building versus the farm and all, you know, one thing about the police, you know, if we do the police or town hall, it's going to open up space that we already have here or something. So I don't know if they have to be done the same year. You know?
Understood, yeah, this,
And that's the thing I'm wondering, because, you know,
yeah, and it just depends on how far you want to defer them, right? So, and that's where we had tested a number of different scenarios. Okay, so if we do police and then come back 2, 3, 4 years later with town hall, how does that change the results? It didn't really impact the overall results that much because town hall is then growing, the cost of town hall is growing at 4.5% a year until you fund it. So the increase in the cost was kind of offsetting a large amount of the benefit you were getting from deferring it. So that, like I said, I understand that it may make sense from a phasing standpoint to spread them out, certainly understood. We were just looking at it from the
yeah. And I'm not-
benefit analysis.
I'm thinking it may, you know, and that's something we got to talk about. Like what Paul's getting at, it's a long time for that community. We need them both.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you know, you could swap the,
Yeah,
you could swap the
absolutely.
community building for the town hall. Because some of the staff is going with the community building, I think, right? If I recall, the planning group is, so that opens up space.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah, and so that's the feedback that we would need from you all, from staff, from ADW, as to what's the right order of funding, right? I mean, you may say, no, I want to see this done first, yeah, I want to see the community center done before police or town hall or fire, or reverse them all, or whatnot. That's where we need feedback from you all, but this was our initial shot at it.
I think my biggest things on it, so, I mean, police station we obviously need, but town hall, you're never gonna have a revenue off that. I mean, it's a building. We're gonna have people there, it's not gonna do anything. The farm and community center, not saying you're gonna make a revenue off of it, but if you had outside sources come in to use that, rent it, this, that, you have there's a potential for revenue there at least. And that's why I'd like to see them maybe moved closer, rather than the town hall right now, on my end anyways. So I think you could, I mean, you could use it for different things. It's gonna,
Yeah. That's just what we have to decide.
Right.
You know, we do the town hall, this would naturally be a bigger community building, but I don't know if it'd be useful or not.
Right.
Because, you know, we need something open space. Where probably if you did that, then parks would move into there. You'd have a big community open space thing for chamber events and all that stuff. And then all of this could be town hall, possibly. So, you know, it's just something to think about. I mean, Great job.
Discussion.
So what's next step, I guess? Or did you finish? Was that it?
At your pleasure, sir.
So Mitch, I think we talked about really get the site plan firmed up. And then I think, Mitch, you indicated it'd probably be best to come back to this with more known information, which would be at the start of '24, is that right?
Yeah,
Is that what you're
I
thinking?
think it probably makes sense, like, wanted to introduce this to y'all, right? And you saw, looks awesome, by the way. So wanted y'all to have some perspective on the financial impact as you're working with ADW on planning out doing the master plan and understand the potential impact of this. And then as you work through the master plan, things start to get a little more defined, your feedback on what your preference is on funding orders, and then we can certainly update this. At the same point in time, we're going to know or at least hopefully have an estimate of what the revaluation impact is for next fiscal year 25. So, as part of the fiscal 24 budget process, retreats, maybe revisit this at that point in time with maybe a little better information on what the reval impact could look like, better information on the phasing, better sense of maybe perhaps cost with the master plan, and go from there. So,
So I think that says probably not come back much on the financing until beginning of '24.
yeah, I mean, I think that, from my perspective, I think that makes a lot of sense. But if there's, in the interim, if you say, hey, just let's rework this, show me what this looks like if you move town hall back and community center up, like, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, let's not do anything like that yet.
Yeah.
Maybe, they probably need to talk to everybody, talk to the parks folks and
Yeah,
kind of get a feel from, I do see the need for both,
yeah, I get it. If it makes you feel better, we've seen this a lot. It's in growing communities, so infrastructure is expensive.
So you're good at numbers. The 8 cents that you proposed in the third option, which was the kind of the valuation option, I think was 8 and 4.
Yes, sir, and really what we were looking at there is the 1.3 million in each cycle, and based upon the estimated values of a penny, we backed it.
8% equates to what type, what's the valuation of a property that would generate that 8%, 8 cents? A $1 billion project? or-
Assuming you keep the 46
Yeah,
cent
everything's
tax
the
rate,
same. I
right?
mean, Amazon comes and, $1 billion project, would that generate that 8 cents? What would generate 8 cents, I guess?
Calculator's not doing it for me.
Because a penny is, what'd you say, 160?
152.
Huh?
152.
152, so
Yeah.
152 times 8 is what,
Hang on, I'm almost there. I'm checking my math.
40 cents on 100 is what?
290 million.
290, oh, that's not as big as I thought it was. So if the bypass had a $290 million mixed use come in or something,
That would generate.
that would mess your numbers all up.
46 cents, yeah, it would make them look great. I would love that. To generate, if you think about the amount is really what you're getting to. The 1.34 million is what you need. About 204, I think it was, what was it, $290 million.
$300 million project.
Yeah.
Or $250 million projects.
Amy's gonna check me on that.
That your numbers? Got it right.
It doesn't keep us at the tax base of 0.46.
And we don't know what the future has to hold, you know, I really don't, so. Good job. Any more questions from the board down here, or?
That's all we got tonight.
I think we're speechless.
That's it?
I think,
Oh, it was a great presentation.
just summarize from staff's perspective, and that's Amy and I, quite frankly, is that it was pretty exciting to see that you could do all this potentially. And so that's why we decided, well, let's show you how you could do that, if that's, and then work from there. So now you have that, and now you can work from there.
Yeah.
So
I think you
that's-
showed it was doable.
Yep.
And what was the last one in 2032? So you talking about build out in 9 years or so, 10-year build out
Yeah.
for what he was proposing there, the 51 million. I came up with about $50-some million total complex.
Yeah, and now, we've assumed that 4.5% inflation, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at our numbers, they're not gonna foot exactly back because we've inflated them.
That's right.
That's all we got for tonight.
No, unless Amy, you got any closing thoughts, comments, suggestions, anything? Well, thank you, appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Very
Thank y'all.
very educational and something that the board will have to think about the next few months and as we go forward. Anything else from the board? Kelly, you got anything? Dave, you got anything? The board has anything? Because that's the last thing I got on the agenda here. So unless I hear opposition, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Not hearing any, meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank everybody for coming. Appreciate it.